Campion's solitary journey now brought him to Lyford Grange, near Oxford. Here, a priest-catcher discovered him and alerted the authorities. The house was ransacked, and after a search of 2 days, a chink of light betrayed Campion's hiding place. Campion was taken to London, where he had a secret meeting with Leicester and Elizabeth herself. The Queen offered him pardon and preferment if he would recant. Campion refused, and in turn reminded Elizabeth of her glorious Catholic ancestors, whom she had betrayed. Campion was returned to the Tower, and 5 days later was put to the rack to extract a confession of treason. At his trial, he was found guilty and sentenced to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. On the scaffold, Campion prayed to God to grant the Queen a long, quiet reign with all prosperity.
The effect of Campion's death on the Catholic world was tremendous strengthening. As always, when you make martyrs, you usually increase the cause you're trying to oppose, and that certainly was the case with Campion. And word got round of his heroic death by any standards. So tremendous encouragement for the Catholic world. The very thing that Elizabeth was trying to cool down, enthusiastic commitment and religion of any sort, was the very thing that he strengthened.
Elizabeth was provoking her Catholic enemies. Most aggrieved of all was Philip of Spain. Whilst Campion's death had insulted his faith, another of Elizabeth's subjects had been busy emptying his pockets. On September the 26th, 1580, a battered ship dropped anchor in Southampton harbour. The ship was the Golden Hind. The captain was one of the most outstanding Elizabethan seamen, Sir Francis Drake. Drake's voyage had begun 3 years before as a pirate expedition to the Pacific. One of the investors was the Queen herself. Drake's target was the Spanish treasure ships. Drake had waged a private war against the most powerful empire on earth. As he sailed back into Southampton, Drake must have had the odd doubt whether or not the Queen would still welcome her pirate subject.
I think Drake would have had a great deal of trepidation when he returned. He had been away for 3 years, and he obviously had no idea what had happened during that time. And I think one of the first things he asked was the Queen still alive? As coming back with all that gold and silver, if the political situation had changed dramatically, he could have been hailed as a hero or condemned as a villain when he had returned to England's shores.
Drake was lucky. Elizabeth was fascinated by his stories and entranced by his loot. And, in the event, his piracy suited her devious foreign policy. Gold from the New World paid for Spain's troops in the Netherlands. So, by diminishing the supply, she had weakened Philip's grip. At its anchorage at Deptford, Drake's ship, renamed the Golden Hind, quickly became a tourist attraction, and in April, Queen Elizabeth herself joined the throng. Elizabeth, despite the outraged protests of the Spanish ambassador, had already pocketed her share of Drake's loot. This amounted to the staggering sum of nearly 1 year's parliamentary revenue and represented a 5,000% return on the money that she'd invested. Now she'd arrived to confer respectability in the most public fashion possible on Drake. She jokingly told him that she'd brought a golden sword with which to cut off the head of this notorious pirate. Instead, Elizabeth gave the sword to the Duke of Anjou's representative and told him to knight Drake here on the deck of the Golden Hind. By asking a Frenchman to knight her pet pirate, Elizabeth was making her allegiances very clear. England was still ranged with France against Spain. The alliance with France meant that her liaison with the Duke of Anjou would continue. After an absence of 2 years, he returned, asking for more money for his campaign against the Spanish in the Netherlands. Accompanied by the French ambassador, he also decided to pop the marriage question again. Elizabeth's answer was astonishing.
You may write this to your king. That the Duke of Anjou shall be my husband.
At the age of 48, Elizabeth was engaged. It was a formal, public betrothal in front of witnesses. Messengers were dispatched round Europe with the astonishing news, and church bells were rung in Antwerp. Back home in England, the reaction was more mixed. Burghley rejoiced, Leicester was furious, and other courtiers burst into tears. That same evening, the opponents of the marriage instructed Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting to paint in graphic terms the restrictions of married life and the horrors of childbirth, with the result that the Queen spent a miserable and sleepless night.
For one extraordinary moment, Elizabeth's heart had ruled her head, but it didn't last long. In the morning, she told Anjou that she couldn't marry him because the welfare of her subjects must come first before her own happiness.
What accounts for this extraordinary on-off behaviour? Elizabeth had certainly abandoned any serious intention of marrying Anjou 2 years earlier, but he was politically useful, and she found his company attractive. So, for one moment, she fondly allowed herself to imagine what might have been. Then, the following morning, in the cold light of day, the pretence was abandoned, and she ditched, with many expressions of regret, her dream lover.
Elizabeth might have thrown her French suitor back in the water, but her frog didn't swim away. He stayed on for 3 months, begging for more money. Finally, Elizabeth was driven to pay him £10,000, and Anjou set sail for the Netherlands to pursue his quest for another kingdom. She would never see him again. She could no longer pull the strings of her puppet prince, for, instead of helping the people of the Netherlands fight the Spanish, Anjou tried to set them against each other in a cynical attempt to seize absolute power for himself. But his plan failed, and in 1583, Anjou retreated to France in disgrace. A year later, he died. Elizabeth was genuinely saddened. She wrote to his mother,
"If you could see a picture of my heart, you would see a body without a soul."
There would be no more pretense of marriage. Elizabeth would rule alone, and she would die without a natural heir.